Well, I want to preface this by telling you I am no mining expert, I am no genealogy expert, but I have learned a whole lot by looking at Bill Farlin and his family, and a whole lot about Butte, and I want to share what I learned, okay? But I'd also like to share some information about where I found the information and how you too can find information here at the archives, up at the Bureau of Mining and Geology, and up at the World Museum of Mining. Because this little venture took me about 3 months, I think, altogether, wasn't it? And it really taught me a lot about the archives here. So just so you guys can fact check me a little bit. This is Bill Farlin's information that was in Leeson's, which is information about Montana. And if you want to know anything about the early days of Montana, that's the book to look at. They have the original book here, but they also have it online for you too. So I'll pass those around. And if you run short, let me know. And then this is a listing of the resources that are available here at the archives, and we'll talk about those a little more. And finally, if you would like to know a little more about genealogy, this is our Butte Genealogy meeting, and we meet tomorrow actually, second Thursday of every month here at the archives at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, and usually it's here, but tomorrow, because of training, did I tell you, you'll be across the hall.
Okay, thanks.
If I don't tell you now, I'll forget, and that way anybody else who's here, you'll be in the small conference room. Yeah, or wherever Julie says, right?
Yep, wherever we can get.
Wherever you can get, so.
Okay, so Bill Farlin. This was the original request from the Farlin family. This came from a great-great-grandson of one of Bill Farlin's brothers, George. This is his line, and he asked us to look at his family. He knew some information, but wasn't sure definitely who everybody was. I wasn't sure who anybody was, and so we started out on this journey together. I think I asked you guys, and you guys were like, yeah, I think he was a Silver King, and and that's kind of what we knew. I went to a few of the information that's here at the archives and found a whole lot of information, so that's what I'm sharing with you. This gentleman wanted to put a memorial up at the Emma mine for his family, and I still haven't seen that come to happen, but boy, let me tell you, it'd be great to have this information somewhere in Butte where people can go and read about his family a little more. So I'm going to start kind of just a quick history. Gold mining in Montana started actually about 1863. Strikes were made in quick succession, first in the neighborhood of Alder, or previously discovered mines of Grasshopper Creek, at Bannock, and then a few more remote places as prospectors pushed out from those areas, started coming up to Butte, and finally in the summer of 1864, Bud Barker, P. Allison, Joseph and James Esler, they pushed across the range, came here to Butte, and looked at that village of Silver Bow, which until last summer I did not even know that was where the original strike was in Butte, and that was through a hike through history. We went out and actually hiked along the creek, and here's this big sign that says this is where gold was discovered in Butte. So if you don't happen to know where that's at, you can just go on the New Copper Trail, and it's right on the New Copper Trail. Great big huge sign out in the middle of nowhere that I didn't even know was there.
Is it west of Rocker?
It's actually
Between Rocker and...
west of Rocker, yep. For about a month, the fortune prospectors remained in that vicinity, testing to see how far that they could go in the short distance. And they found new diggings, and then they took the ore back down to Virginia City to have it assayed. and everything. And then suddenly, everybody in Virginia City was moving up to Butte because they knew that there was a strike there. So they all came to Butte. In fact, they said that in 1866, the creek channel, Silver Bow Creek Channel, between Butte and Silver Bow was worked by a company of 4 to 5 men for every 200 feet. So it's kind of like if you've ever been to Alaska and seen the Alaska salmon come up and you're standing next to somebody fishing on the Kenai, that was probably what Silver Bow Creek looked like. And that began to kind of decline in 1970, or 1870, pardon me, you guys. Okay, so this is what the miners look like, living along the creek. And this is what Butte looked like.
Wow.
Not much out there. Timber Butte. This is the one hotel. This is 1875. Big Butte is right over here. Court Street runs along here in Maine. And actually in some of the information that I read, they said that Bill Farlin built a little shack, okay, a little house to live in, and it happened to be the 4th cabin in Butte, Silver Bow, in Butte. So he probably lived in one of these. Where's the littlest cabin? That's where he lived. Then the quartz era came, which would be the silver era. And this is where our boy comes in to be. Actually discovered the Travonia mine. That was called the Asteroid Mine at that time. And it's located kind of down in this, back in this area, probably about right there. And started the Dexter Mill too as well. This is what the Travonia looks like now. And it went from 1874, actually the 9th of 1875 to 1954. And it was not only a silver giant, but also a manganese giant as well. Finally, and I want to thank Dick Gibson for letting me borrow this. This was in the Montana Standard about the same time I was looking at this family. But this basically starts with all of the mines that were in Butte. And here's William Farlin right here in the Dexter Mill. Okay, but look what happens from there. This is the Anaconda Company all the way down here. But this is how all the mines come in. And this was published in 2019 in the Montana Standard. I think you probably get a copy of it up here. Or go online to newspapers.com. This is kind of a quick show of where the West Camp mines are at. This is Travonia. We'll be talking about that one in particular. We'll be talking about the Emma, which is right here. And then I always like to talk about the Star West because one of the brothers actually mined in the Star West too. And I'd like to point out this map that you guys can look at when we get done. All 3 of the brothers actually worked close to each other in the Emma, the Travonia, and the Star West mines. And so this shows basically where the stopes were at in the mines right behind you there, where Butte's sitting over top of them and where the shafts are at and stuff. So Tony Roth makes these up, and if you need any information about any mine, making sure that your house is not going to fall into one, you can look at that one. Whoops, archival tape took a dive. So this is the West Camp, very important. As far as copper goes, the Mountain Con, was the largest producer of copper in Butte here. At the archives, I wanted to kind of go through where I found the information because the archives, it's so amazing to be able to come up here and you can go back 140 years and find an original book that lists everybody that lived in Butte at that time. You can have all kinds of resources. You can look at stope maps of all the mines. You can look to see where people lived. There's so much great information. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through what I used. I used the Pope city directories. We'll talk about those. And they have these from 1884 to 2008 to use the cemetery index and find out where people are buried. Oftentimes use the naturalization records, and this one I did not look in the naturalization because they were already Americans here. School census records, they did have children, the brothers that lived here, and so we could see those. Birth and death records, I found all of the brothers except for one in the death records here. Also coroner's records, if somebody happens to die unexpectedly, there's a great coroner's records that will tell you what happened to them, what they found from the records. High school annuals, newspapers, and they also have these online. The great registers, these are tax information and property records, or sorry, voting records. Feel free to come up here. These guys can take you around quickly, pull out the information, have it piled up ready for you to go, and off you go. They can show you how to use it too, which is even better. And that's what I learned from doing this research. This is actually a Polk City directory, and the first one, they had 1884, but here's George Farlin's family. Joseph Farlin, this is a brother of Bill, This is our guy here. And this one is a son, and Frank is would be a grandnephew, and Clarence would be a nephew also. So you can see how I kind of trace those family members through. But also in these are information about different things that are happening in Butte. The government, who was mayor, who ran Butte, who supplied the liquor to Butte, all the important information that you need. But here's information about what happened in the Butte mines in 1885. Here's the Dexter mill that William started. It's a 15 stamp mill. And just information like that. It's amazing what's in these little books to read. So I kind of go through those during the period of time that they're here and make copies for the people that we get requests, and then we send these to them. Sometimes you'll find them on Ancestry, but most of the time you have to come up here. In the vertical files that I looked at, there was just limited information at that time about Bill Farlin, and we did kind of expand that a little bit since. So that's information, and they can pull information on mines, they can pull information on people, buildings, houses. If you want to look up your property to find out who owned it when, you can pull information like that out of that. So those are great, the vertical files. Also, they've got a library full of books, and I knew nothing about Bill Farlin, so I started out and I looked at Copper Camp, and thank God his name came up and it told me a little bit about him. So that's the first one here. And then I looked at the richest hill on earth. They had a great, and Floyd made a great timeline of what was happening in Butte at the time, so I kind of knew what was happening. Brief history of Butte. This is one I use a lot. It's Montana pay dirt, and it has information about mining in Butte. I think it costs like $40 or so. You can get it on Amazon, but they have it here too. Great resource if you know nothing about mining, which I did not. Also, things that you can access here. You can access Ancestry for free, Family Search. You can even do that at home for free. Newspapers.com, Find a Grave. These are all things that I use to look at families. The databases that they have here, there's a whole database on miners that lived in Butte at one time, and it works really well unless you have the last name Shea or Sullivan. It's like a whole freaking book. You know, like how many of those books? But they are full. Cemetery records, mine injuries records, so if any of your family members were killed or injured in a mine, they have information usually for those. And the vertical files, again, societies, any unions that people were in, organization, just people in general, there's information. And again, the great library that's here. So this is the newspapers, but they also have the original newspapers. And on the bottom here, actually it has, I just walked right to it today, 1901, pulled the day that Bill Farlin died, and here's a 2-page spread on Bill Farlin. Okay, you can read it, and you don't have to look at the little magnifier on newspapers.com. You can come up here and look at it. It's great. But in these also, in the newspapers, you can find the whole story. This is Bill Farlin, passes away. He was 66 years old, 67, we don't know for sure. Okay, came here in 1863 to the territory, worked in Bannock. He also lived in Butte for a while and found a whole bunch of claims. He has a brother, George, and a sister, Mrs. E.A. Driggs, that were living in Butte as well. So we're going to talk about that family relations. This is the death records. This is his actual death record. First thing you do is you go right here to the death record list. You'll find Bill Farlin in here. Then you'll go get the book with this number here, right here. And right here is Bill Farlin. Died in Butte, Montana. A lie that he was a widower. Okay, he was single. They said 66 in the death notice, but this one says 67. He's buried at Mount Moriah. Died of pneumonia. Has a weak heart because he's old, but let me tell you, 67 is a young pup. So it's amazing what you can find. Most of these death records, even the ones from Ireland, list usually the father's name, of course, that they all came from Ireland, okay, no help there, and then the birthplace of the mother. They usually tell you an informant, and that's usually a family member. None of the Farlin families have any of this information. I think somebody must have kicked them out at St. James, at the sister hospital then, and left them there on the curb or something. So we didn't bring any information with them. Okay. These are information from the cemetery index. This is where the Farlins are buried. George, a brother, Herbert, a nephew, our boy Bill, Alice, a niece. This one is his sister and also a nephew. Okay, these are the mine-related information. This is that mining book that, again, if you're a Shea or a Sullivan, forget it, okay? But if you have an unusual name, you can find it usually in here. This actually tells you where they work each month, what mine they worked in, so you can just trace your whole family. It's amazing. These tear me up.
Just to clarify, these were the era of the contract miners
Right.
who worked for the ACM.
Yeah.
So if they worked in the North Butte Mining Company, we wouldn't have that. So it's from
Yeah.
about 1912 to 1923.
Yeah, short period of time, but
Yeah,
that's where
but
most of Butte was at.
yeah, exactly. It does represent the peak of Butte's production at that time. So yeah, they're really great, but they're also ginormous.
Yes.
They're not digitized or anything. We actually go down, and two of us have to pull it off the shelf and open it up. They're great books.
They are wonderful books. Kim's right. They do take a yeoman's group to pick them up. This is a listing of the dead miners from the Emma. So if you ever don't have time to run up to the World Museum of Mining and look at the mining memorial up there, this is a quick way you can look at family. These are the Stoke mines, or Stoke, out of the Stoke books, pardon me. And again, that kind of shows you how the mines kind of are underneath us, but all tied, a lot of them are tied together, very much so.
Yep.
I love these books. These are the Sanborn maps, Kim's personal favorites. These show actually the houses where each person lives. They're in the back room here, readily accessible to anybody. This is where what you look at, you're looking at your property as well. But from that, finding the people here, I was able to put on a map. This is where Bill's brother lived, George. I think that's Bill's right there. This is where his other brother lived that ran a boarding house here in Butte. So I was able to kind of drive by, take a look to see if the houses were there. They aren't, none of them. They're all gone. Okay, this would be what a birth record looks like, but the 3 children that I was looking for that were born in Butte, because a lot of the family was born in Kansas, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and stuff. None of them had birth records, and that's not unusual because they were all born in the 1880s, okay? And so that's one of the reasons why you won't find them all. But you can find birth records here very easily. I don't want to discourage you from looking. This is federal census. This is the 1880 federal census here in Butte. This is Bill Farlin. This is W.L. Farlin, white guy, male. Don't know what his age is right now, can't see it, but he was a minor, okay? This is where he was born. This is where his father was born. This is where his mother was born. This is his brother George. This is George's wife. This is actually his brother O.D. And this is his sister, and this is her child. So you can trace the family easily that way. Okay. Those are actually on Ancestry, and you can get those here at the archives. Also in Family Search too, you'll see them for free in Family Search. So this is what I know about Bill Farlin, okay? So his father's name was Joseph Farlin. He was born either in Pennsylvania or New York, and I'll show you why that's kind of interesting. He died in Ottumwa, Iowa, and I'll show you why that's interesting. He was born, we think, in 1793 and died in 1847, that we know about. His mother's name was Lydia Thomas Farlin, and she was born in 1796, died sometime after 1870, can't find her for sure, but I'll give you my suspicions of where she's at. She was born in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and she died, I think, in Paris, Kansas, okay? They moved from Crawford County, Pennsylvania to Iowa in 1843. It's kind of what the information has said, but I actually found a brother of his, George, that was born in Iowa in 1840, so I think this is off a little bit, okay? They were the parents of Orrin, Eliza, William, our boy, Joseph, George, and Sarah. And all of them, at one time or another, lived here in Butte. Wow. This is information about the wealthy man in Ottumwa, Iowa. Actually, Bill went back there. He often went back to the States. That's what they called it back then. And he went to Ottumwa, Iowa. And this talks about his family. This is the only thing I can find on his family, okay? But said at one time they owned quite a little bit of Ottumwa, Iowa. And he just, they talk about where they owned and what they were doing. But originally it said that Bill was a $5 million millionaire, which I think is probably underestimated. But that was the story that he told when he went to visit. So just to get an idea where they lived, here's where William Farlin was born. For a long time I thought it was just Cambridge, Pennsylvania, but it's Cambridge Springs in Crawford County. His father was either from Pennsylvania, we don't know that, or in New York, so it wasn't too far away. Okay? This town's about 1,500 people now, so I think everybody moved to Butte. Came in probably through Lake Erie and settled here. His mother, of course, I think maybe goes all the way back to the Pilgrims, okay? and I think her family might have been originally from Plymouth in England. Have to get Joanne on that one. So why was I interested in this all of a sudden? Okay, the reason why, this is where the family lived when they moved to Iowa, Ottumwa, Iowa. This is where I was born. This is where I went to nurses training. So don't you just love this guy being here? Okay. And actually, I was trying to find real quick. William Clark, actually, his family settled in this area, actually by Mount Pleasant. So that's my first tip off that I think they knew each other. Okay? I didn't know him, of course, I wasn't quite born then. So, Bill Farlin, he was, we'll talk about his birth in a little bit, but he was born again in Cambridge Springs, Crawford County, Pennsylvania, I think in 1838, okay? Not 1834. You're gonna see his grave says 1834, okay? And just looking at the federal records, the information that you have now in front of you, okay? I think somebody screwed up his gravestone, which is not unusual. Again, family moved from Iowa, or to Iowa in 1918, that should be 1843. And I think probably 1840, they were farmers, but they also owned part of Ottumwa. About 19 years of age, he takes off for Salmon, Idaho on his little horse, okay? Goes across the plains on a pony, okay? To Fort Kearney, Green River, up to Fort Bridger, across the Snake River, and to Fort Laney. So that was kind of the journey they went on, this little pony. Wouldn't that scare the heck out of you? But he said that he did run into Indians throughout the way. He loved to talk about the times that he ran into Indians and what happened, okay? And also talked about what he saw a little bit in this information that you have here. He arrives at Pioneer Gulch in Bannock in July of 1857. And then March 23rd, he filed and recorded a claim, number 12, on the Rattlesnake Creek in Bannock. W.A. Clark arrives about the same time. Again, I think they knew each other, okay? In July 1858, he joins a party of 21 men, and they explore the Snake River, the Yellowstone River. They discovered Yellowstone Lake and the falls. And they were looking for gold at that period of time in this area. He arrives then, goes back to Virginia City in 1863, and then he goes to Arizona. Why not? On a prospecting trip, right? This guy's he's got wanderlust, gold lust, I think, okay? But he's out to Arizona prospecting. In June of 1866, he actually discovered the asteroid mine here in Butte. And from this, he took a little sample out of the prospect hole, had an assay done in, what's the name of that town, Joe?
Hawaii.
Hawaii? Thanks. That's my Idaho consultant right there. And he found it was rich in gold, but mainly silver and copper. He had that sample smelted, and it became the first ounce of silver coming out of Montana. Bill then goes to Idaho because that's kind of where everything was happening at that time, did some prospecting, and he abandoned that claim here in Butte. In 1872, he locates the Excelsior mine in Bannock. I didn't even know there was one. And this is his partner, Phil. And then Bill he sells the claim then to Bill. And then he goes to, again, the States. And I think maybe that's why he went back, is to go to his mother's funeral or happening. So this is what our guy looks like. Cute guy, I think. Okay. This is again, the routes to the Montana gold fields in 1863 and 1870. You either came up the river, went across by steamboat and came down, okay? Or you'd come on the way to California, okay? Or you'd come up through Salt Lake City. So those were the ways that the miners got here. I don't know if all of them rode little ponies, but I'm sure a number of them did. Because there was no railroads, remember, at that time, so they had to get here somehow. Okay, so I loved seeing, this is the 1870 census for Butte. And Butte was Deer Lodge County at that time in Montana Territory. Again, we weren't a state yet. Butte was a miner. He had 250 bucks in his pocket. I don't know, I was gonna check to see how much that would be, but I'm sure it was pretty well. But the guy that he lived with is Anthony Bernard from New York. He had $2,000, so he was a much better gold miner than our boy Bill. And again, he built the 4th cabin in Butte City. But just to know a little bit about how Butte was kind of on the decline at that time. At that time, there were 94 Chinese miners. And you remember after the gold was mined, then the Chinese miners came in, and they were the ones that really found a lot of the gold, okay? So that's why you see so many Chinese miners. They probably moved up from Virginia City, came to Butte, we're living here. There were 65 white miners though, 1 black miner, 5 farmers, and they were all from Denmark. And then 3 saloon keepers, so it's not just now. There are plenty of saloons, 2 butchers, 2 blacksmiths, couple milk carriers, stable keeper, cooks, clerks, freighters, 1 doctor. So, but they only had 244 people. 2 Chinese laundrymen, 2 white laundrymen, and 16 women that were keeping house, 39 children, and there were 2 prostitutes. So, and they were Chinese, but they could have been just Chinese ladies, but they were all prostitutes at that time. So 244 people lived in Butte at that time. It was dying, okay? This is in front of the motel that you could stay at. So we get up to 1975, Bill comes back to the asteroid on the night of December 31st, 1874 to work the claim, because there was just a new law that came in that said that if you did not work the claim within the year that you had the claim, you were kicked off the claim, from what I understand. Shake your head for anybody that knows mining, if that's right, okay? So they decided that on January 1st of 1875, everybody had to re-get their claims, okay? So that's what he did. And he relocated the claim and a number of other claims that he knew about here and renamed it the Travonia. And the new era for silver mining then begins in Butte, okay? One reference that I said that Clark renamed it the mine, but don't know whether that's true or not.
Well, didn't Clark jump that claim?
Oh, we're gonna hear a lot about
You're gonna get to that, okay.
So he decided, okay, I have to send all this ore down to Salt Lake City or put it on the boat, take it wherever. And so that was gonna cost a bundle, okay? So he decides he's gonna, after looking at how to get the silver out, he decides he's going to do a 10 stamp Dexter mill. He's going to build that. This guy was ambitious, okay? Didn't have the money, had a lot of ambition, no money. So then he goes over to his friend, who I think is his friend at the Deer Lodge Bank, who is owned by W.A. Clark, Larrabee, and Donald, and he asked them if he can borrow, I think, $30,000, okay? He signed a note, and it came due, and I've read that it came due like a really short time, like 60 days. He had to turn that around, okay? Which probably was not a smart move to sign that. And he actually put his mine and his mill up for collateral. And then Clark takes over it as managing it, because he failed on that note. And then later, Clark, smart guy, he says that the mill and the mine both failed. And so he bought out that claim from Larrabee and Associates and became the sole owner. Tricky guy, huh? And the actual trustee sale, which you can find in the Butte newspapers here, was on the 21st of August, 1877. So our scoundrel, William A. Clark, okay? This is the Travonia lode, and it is Travonia lode at that time. And this shows that he, with his three partners, I think that shows 1877 there on that, or 78.
Question about the name then.
Mhm.
I see Travona
Mhm.
or Travonia.
I've seen it written both ways, but
Spelled both ways?
yeah, but this is on the original.
That says
load.
Travona. I
Yeah.
think there was, somebody, a clerk or somebody miswrote it at one point. And that's why we have a Travona mine and a Travonia street.
Street, yeah.
Yeah.
Street has an IA.
Yeah.
Mine has just the A at the end.
Yeah, I think it was somebody just writing too quickly or somebody misreading it.
Okay.
Human error,
You
yeah.
This is
there. It's a
the,
Butte thing.
yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah,
These actually, they have them up at the Bureau of Mining and Geology up at Montana Tech. If you've never made a trip up to that building and met with any of the people, it's worth your time. It's just a great find. They have information about all the mines. You can track basically anything. Anybody else want to throw anything in about what they have? They're just so accommodating. Really tells about Butte history here. So not only did he decide to have a mine, he decided to have the mill, okay, but he decides he's going to build a home for his whole family to come and live in, okay. So he has this guy, J.M. Bowles. Didn't ever look at him, but he'd be somebody to look at. He's a first-class builder. Came all the way from Butte out to the Travonia and out to the West Camp, and he's going to build this new house. And Mr. Farlin expects two of his brothers and families to come from the east, and actually didn't know how many of his family members end up. But in the 1880 federal census and in the 1890, we find that they all came, okay? You got George, Joseph, Bill, and their children, okay? They come to Butte. In the Travonia mine, actually, in 1893, it was closed because of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. That was what backed our dollar back then, was silver. And there was a plunge then in silver prices, and that's kind of went away. But Bill never gave up, and his brothers didn't give up. They went to Glendale, and then he had a whole bunch of patents in Butte with his brothers and their families, and we'll talk about that. This is what Glendale looked like, big place. Now it's a ghost mine. If you haven't ever taken a ride into the mountains down by Glendale or Glen, it's a great place to go. They've got the cones there, and it's just a fun thing to go. This is Bill Farlin right down here. There he is. This is his little plot of place that he must have had a little cabin, okay, a little place for him to live, and this is in Glendale. And this is just a picture of all the claims that were just in that area where Leslie Clark lived. There, like the Parnell was there, okay, the Star West, the Travonia, and then over here is the Emma. But they had their fingers in this mine, in the ancient mine, in the Travonia, the Bonanza, the Star West. At one time or another, they actually had their fingers in all of these mines. This is just randomly 1888, filed for the records. His brother George and his other brother Joseph, the Emma lode, the dispatch load. This was his nephew, the Karazaman.
Or so.
Oh, thank you guys, thanks. I wasn't born in Butte or battered in Butte or whatever, so some of these names are a little tricky for me. George, his brother. Then we get down to Bill Farlin. He gave some, or sold some land, bought some land. But this is, I mean, it was like every day I could find something that these guys were buying. Okay, in 1899, he decides he already knew a lot about this whole area. Again, remember he came to Bannock. Outside of Dillon is this little town called Farlin. Okay, that was named after him and his brother, O.D. And that's along the creek bottom here. Let's see, he'd already come across the pass here. Okay, Rochester is located kind of about right around here. Also, he was in around Glen, Lima, Dell, Armstead. He knew this country like the back of his hand, I believe. Back in here. In 1901, he testified. This was just like 2 months before he died. He testified in the case of Ella Driggs Bordeaux in a divorce case, and this is his actual niece, okay? And I'll show you a little bit of information about that. He died from pneumonia. He had it for 8 days, probably had the flu, probably a leftover from the flu, more than likely. That was probably coming through at that period of time, had pneumonia, didn't have antibiotics, so he kind of cashed in from that. Again, in 1903, Farlin, Montana was named for William and O.D., and they had filed claims in that area in 1874, again about the same time that he found the silver here in Butte, okay? They had the Indian Queen mine and the greenstone lodes that they had at one time. Amazing, these guys could have been zillionaires. This talks about Rochester, how Billy Farlin, he was gonna pad that wallet, okay, because he was out there still mining, and he was like in his 60s at this point. This is Farlin, Montana, has a different sign now, but this was after they got the train to Dillon, they were able then to actually start mining in that area a lot more. Okay. Bill dies. This is where the bad information comes from, okay? And this is his brother O.D., or Orrin. These guys were remarkable too. All his brothers were great. 1820s, born in Pennsylvania. He was married or sealed in 1847 to his wife Flavilla Levitt in Iowa. They got on the Mormon Trail in June of 1852, landed in Salt Lake in October. He was with John Tidwell's party. These two got divorced because she married another guy at the same time. She came to Montana and started prospecting, okay? And I also found him in 1870 in Missoula at the Cedar Creek Mines. In 1874 in the Blue Wing Mines, he was injured. And I don't know if that was the one down by Bannock in that area, or if it was the Blue Wing Mines here in Butte. So, but he got trampled by a horse. 1880 census, he was with the Farlin family living in the house. He died sometimes after 1880. He's the only one that I couldn't find a death certificate. He died in a mining accident, though, from what I could find, he was possibly a millwright. He had a little girl that died before they started on the Mormon Trail. These kids were all born in Utah. Actually, this guy came up to Montana, lived in Glendale. He lived in Glendale. He actually lived in Jefferson Valley as well. And this young girl died of in childbirth. This is the Mormon Trail, how they came across. This is where they jumped on in Iowa, right around here, came along the trail, and then got to Salt Lake City. His sister, Eliza, she was born in 1826 in Pennsylvania. She came with her family again. She married this guy named James Caddick, and I think he was kind of a low-life guy myself. He was married once before, just a few days. I don't know whether his family died or what, but they got married, and then she actually had Florence and Charles with him. Florence actually did some mining here in Butte, and Charles did some mining as well in Butte. In 1871, she marries this ex-Civil War captain in Kansas, came to Butte, and then she died in Butte from Bright's disease. She's buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery next to William. The next brother, another amazing guy, Joseph. He was born in Pennsylvania, 1835, got married though in California in 1855, okay? Moved to Kansas, and then in Butte, he, besides working as a miner, him and his wife actually ran a boarding house. And the census that I found, there were probably 15 people living in that boarding house, so it was a fairly good-sized boarding house. He actually did a lot of discoveries in Butte. He died September 9th in Butte's Bright's disease also. He's buried at Mount Moriah, and he had a bunch of kids. Frank, single, married here, or lived here in Butte, miner. Clarence, also a miner. Alice, Lily, Emma, who claims that the Emma mine was named after her, and a son, Herbert, that was born here in Butte. Oh, back here, they at one time lived in Kansas, the whole group of families other than Williams, and there was a town named after him there, Farlinville. Okay, so they had a town in Montana named after him, they had a town in Kansas named after him, and this was pioneers again. Okay, this is where that poor guy had to go. He started here in Tumble, Iowa, went all the way out to California, got hitched, came all the way back to Farlinville, lived there for about 10 years, and then moved up to Butte, Montana. Okay, so he got around too. He worked at the Star West Lode. The other famous guy, George William Farlin, he was born in Des Moines County, Iowa. He was in the Civil War, and he was actually captured in the Battle of Atlanta in 1864, went to Andersonville, and was transferred to Florenceville. He escaped and hid in the swamps for 40 days. He was recaptured close to the Union lines, taken back to his regiment in 1864, and thank God the war ended. Nothing else bad happened to him, and he got out in 1865. He was a postmaster then in Kansas, and then he came to Butte and actually married his next door neighbor from Iowa. And here in Butte, found the Emma mine with his brother Joseph. He died in 1904, was probably chopping wood, got a splinter in his hand, got blood poisoning, no antibiotics again, and croaked, okay? Buried at Mount Moriah, and he had 3 kids, George, who was a real estate guy later on, Irene, and Grace. And this is actually the guy that we were doing the search, this was his line. Okay, this is the Emma lode, right here. This is what the Emma mine looked like. Don't you love it that Butte is right here, and just right over here, we were in the middle of the industry. Right there is the Emma mine. I think this is the back of the post office now. This front of the post office now. Sitting right there. Love it. Another picture. That was a big mine. Yeah. Okay. The last sister, Sarah Farlin Driggs, she was born 1845. She married Alfred Driggs, who was also a miner in Iowa. They lived in Kansas for a while. Then they came to Butte, and she eventually moved to Salt Lake City, and she died after 1900. But her daughter, Ella, is probably the reason why women in Montana can get divorced. She took her divorce case all the way to the Montana Supreme Court, and it's written about in a great story in a Montana history magazine. So if you want to read this story, it is a great story. She was quite the lady. Farlin Mines, again, 1893, panic hits. The Emma is owned by somebody other than the Farlins at this time. Copper King Wars start. U.S. starts supplying the world's copper, and Butte produces 41% of it, Butte's copper at that time. In 1900, there were 75 operating mines. They said there was a whole bunch, millions of claims, but a lot of the claims were by rich guys that didn't ever do any mining. 1901, our boy Bill dies. 1902, about 70,000 people in Butte. And then in 1904, George dies. The Emma gets closed because of bankruptcy in 1905. And then it's reopened for manganese because we needed it for the war effort at that time. And then in 1919, again, the Travonia is opened and going full steam with manganese as well. This is the Emma mine, and they said that they found the major vein right here at the 400 level. I think it was 1901 they found that vein. Somebody with mining knowledge may know that for sure. Okay, 1934, the mules were taken out of the mine. 1940, the steel frame was moved from the Pennsylvania mine to the Travonia. 1941 to 45, World War II happens. They need that manganese because we were importing 91% of our manganese from other places. 1950, there were 10 mines, but the Travonia and the Emma were right there. 1950, the Berkeley pit is opened. 1958, there's 5 mines, but again, you don't see the Emma and the Travonia then. 1963, the head frame was dismantled, the shaft was capped, and then ACM starts dewatering the West Camp, and then permanently sealed. This is the area that were flooded. This is what the Emma Park looked like when they were fixing it up. Okay. The only thing left at the mining museum is the original hoist from the Emma mine. I'd like to thank the archives for Kim, especially for letting me look at this family. The Bureau of Mining and Geology, Tony Roth again, and Denise. They just did a great job of finding information. World Museum of Mining, of course. Good places in my heart. Questions?
There's a wonderful article on the subsidence related to the Emma mine. Did you read that?
No, but I've read a lot about it.
Yeah, in the Montana Journal, is it, of history about a year ago.
Oh, yeah, I think
It's,
that,
the subsidence is pretty well put, but there still is a subsidence down in Central Butte down
yeah, I think that was Brian Leach's information. He's done a talk here that was spectacular. So,
there. Where did William Farlin make his money if he was worth $5 million?
Little claims. I think he was a really good, he was a really good prospector, okay? I don't think he was much of a businessman, okay? Tried to be, okay? But just a really good prospector. He knew Southwest Montana, I think, like the back of his hand. And he had claims everywhere. But I have a list of like 25 claims that are at the Bureau of Mining and Geology that those brothers had. It's amazing. You start looking. Leslie?
So the Dexter Mill, was that located like just short or south of the 800 block of Dakota, kind of where the Colorado Street train trestle?
I believe so. Actually, there's a picture of it right back here behind
behind the, we'll lift the
Yep,
screen up.
we'll lift
take
the
a look.
screen up and you can actually see where it's
Yeah,
at.
because there was always a lot of foundation there,
Mm-hmm.
so at one point I knew that there had to be.
I think a number of the mills were located over in that area. Miners, anybody can verify if I'm not lying, straight out? But it was close to the mine,
Yeah.
over in that area.
Because the trucks used to run from the Emma straight down the street, so I'm assuming they went to the mill.
Mm-hmm.
No, they went to the,
Train.
They
went to the train.
The trains.
Oh, that's right, the train track was down, the
Uh-huh.
BP.
PA&P,
Yeah,
right down by Jamie Shea's gas station.
okay,
Well, there's no gas station.
okay,
They went right down the street and dumped.
and dump there. Okay, so there you go. Other questions?
So Julie, growing up, we were always told the population was 100,000 at the turn of the century, but your notes say not till 1919, so
Yeah.
maybe because of World War I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of, well, right before World War I was kind of the peak. And if you go into the archives, you can kind of see where the large amount of people were at, because these little books tell you all the people that lived in Butte. This is 1885, this is 1900, it's about twice as big, okay? A lot more businesses, a lot more people living here.
And we don't have an official count of 100,000. The census says far less because they just count the city. And the city didn't include the flats at that time. So, and then you have different numbers coming out of the city directories based on their algorithms of people. So that estimate in
80
like,
to 100,
yeah, around World War I would, I think we're safe to say 90 to 100,000 people.
And then it
Yeah.
dipped, you know?
Yeah.
Everybody left and went to Seattle,
Yes.
big Spokane, and that's where this family ended up.
But really, the peak of immigration into Butte and immigration from foreign nations into Butte as well was 1895 to 1915.
Wouldn't you have loved to live here then? Would have been fun. Well, thank you guys for your attention. You want to ask?